I woke up that morning in Seattle, the soft gray light filtering through the curtains, and felt the familiar weight of monotony pressing down on me. David lay beside me, his breathing steady and reassuring, but instead of comfort, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. Our life together had become a routine. Dinner at 6, a quick chat about our day, and then off to bed. Love was there, but it felt like a blanket that was too heavy, smothering me rather than keeping me warm. "Are you up?" David mumbled, stretching slightly. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile. But my thoughts were elsewhere, wandering through the drudgery of my daily life. I needed something more, something I couldn't quite name. That afternoon, I found myself in the cafe near our office, idly scrolling through my phone. The usual clatter of cups and chatter surrounded me, but I felt detached, like I was observing from a distance. Then I saw him, Jake, my colleague, leaning against the counter. His smile was infectious, and when our eyes met, I felt an electric spark that sent a shiver down my spine. "Hey, fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. "Yeah, just grabbing a coffee," I replied, my heart racing. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, a magnetic pull that neither of us could ignore. As we chatted, laughter flowed easily between us, and I realized how much I craved this connection. It was more than mere friendship. It was a breath of fresh air amid the stale routine of my life. The moments we shared were charged with possibility, making me question everything I thought I wanted. I caught myself wondering, was this what I had been missing all along? The first time I felt that little spark, the flutter in my chest, I was sitting in a meeting room with David. He was there, of course, right beside me, exuding the calm assurance that had always drawn me to him. But my attention drifted. Jake, my colleague, was across the table, his dark hair slightly tousled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. As the discussion grew tense, I felt a rush of something unexpected. Our eyes locked for a moment, and I swear I felt the air crackle between us. "Can you believe this?" Jake said, breaking the silence with a half smile, his gaze still on me. "I thought we were supposed to be a team." I chuckled softly, trying to mask the sudden heat flooding my cheeks. "It's like we're in a game of tug-of-war, isn't it?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Well, I'm not letting go anytime soon. What about you?" Another glance, and I could feel the walls of my world shift slightly. I turned back to the meeting, but the tension lingered like a whisper in my ear. Every time Jake spoke, I found myself hanging on his words, the way he articulated his thoughts with such passion, his presence drawing me in. After the meeting, I found myself lingering in the hallway, pretending to check my emails. I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced when Jake approached, his casual confidence radiating from him. "Fancy a drink after work?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. I hesitated. I don't know. I mean, David. Just one drink. It'll be fun," he said, his eyes sparkling with a mischief that made my heart skip. "It's a chance to unwind. Besides, you deserve it." I knew I shouldn't, but the thought of just one drink with Jake, away from the daily grind, felt exhilarating. "All right, just one," I replied, unable to conceal the smile creeping onto my lips. The hours dragged on until 5 o'clock finally rolled around. I met Jake at a nearby bar, the atmosphere buzzing with laughter and chatter. The moment I walked in, I spotted him leaning against the counter, a drink in his hand, looking effortlessly charming. "Hey there," he greeted, a grin spreading across his face as he took in my presence. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, feeling the nervous excitement bubble within me. We settled into a booth, and the conversation flowed easily, like we had known each other for years. Jake talked about his recent trip to Mexico, and I shared my own stories, laughing at the silly things that had happened. With each passing moment, I felt a connection deeper than friendship growing between us. "It's amazing how we always seem to be stuck in these endless meetings," he said, his voice teasing. "But here we are, actually enjoying ourselves." I giggled, feeling the tension of the day melt away. "You're right. This is much better." Our laughter echoed, and I felt my heart race each time he leaned closer, his eyes locked onto mine. There was a chemistry between us that was undeniable, sparking something inside me that I hadn't realized was missing. "So," he said, his tone suddenly more serious, "what do you do to unwind when you're not working?" I hesitated, the mention of David pricking at the back of my mind, but I brushed it aside. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been so caught up in routine lately." "Routine can be a killer," Jake replied, his eyes searching mine. "You deserve to break free, even just a little." His words struck a chord. I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. I was here, with him, enjoying an evening that felt so different from my life at home. As the night went on, the laughter turned to something more intimate. We shared secrets, and the conversation became personal. I found myself leaning in, captivated by his stories, his laughter, and the way he made me feel alive. "Here's to breaking free." Jake raised his glass, and I clinked mine against his. "To new adventures." "New adventures," I echoed, feeling a thrill run through me. I didn't want the night to end. The warmth between us was intoxicating, and I could sense the unspoken tension lingering in the air. As we finished our drinks, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Can I see you again? I'd hate for this to be a one-time thing." "Definitely," I replied, my heart racing. But as I walked home later, the thrill faded and reality set in. I thought of David and the life we had built together. Yet, the memory of my evening with Jake lingered, igniting a desire for something more. Something I hadn't realized I was missing. I was caught between the warmth of my stable life and the exhilarating pull of the unknown. That night, I felt alive for the first time in ages, and I knew I was standing at the edge of a precipice, daring to take a leap into the unknown. The night was lively, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. I was sitting at the bar with my colleagues, the warm glow of the dim lights casting a comfortable haze over the room. It was supposed to be a typical post-work happy hour, a chance to unwind after a long week. But as I sipped my drink, I felt a strange sense of anticipation in the air. And then there was Jake. Jake had always been charming, with his easy smile and the way he effortlessly drew people into conversation. But tonight, he seemed different. There was something electric about our interactions, an unspoken tension that hung between us like the thick humidity before a storm. I caught his gaze across the room, and my heart skipped a beat. It felt like he saw me, really saw me, and I was suddenly aware of every little detail. The way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, the strong line of his jaw, and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Hey, do you want to get some fresh air?" he asked, leaning closer, his voice low and inviting. I nodded, feeling a thrill of excitement at the thought of stepping away from the crowd. We slipped outside, where the night air was cool against my skin. As we stood there, the chatter from inside faded into the background, and it was just the two of us. I could feel the heat radiating off him, and it made my pulse quicken. Jake leaned against the wall, his gaze steady on mine. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" "Just the usual," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But inside, I felt a storm brewing. David, my husband, was always in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the life I had built. Yet here I was, drawn to Jake in a way I hadn't expected. He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne, a mix of cedar and something fresh that made my heart race. "You know, I've always thought you were incredible," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You light up a room." My breath hitched. I was flattered, of course, but there was something deeper in his tone, a sincerity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thanks, Jake. You're not so bad yourself," I managed to reply, my cheeks warming. And then it happened. One moment we were standing there, the tension palpable, and the next, he reached out and pulled me closer. My heart raced as I felt the heat of his body against mine. I looked up at him, and for a moment, everything else faded away. David, my life, my responsibilities. It was just us. Before I could think, Jake leaned down and pressed his lips against mine. The kiss was unexpected, but it ignited a fire inside me that I hadn't realized was there. My mind screamed for me to pull away, to remember my vows, but my body betrayed me. I melted into him, feeling the warmth of his hands on my waist and the way his lips moved against mine with a desperate urgency. Time seemed to stand still, and I lost myself in the moment. It was intoxicating, the thrill of the unexpected, the taste of something forbidden. I could feel the world spinning around us, but all I could focus on was the rush of emotions coursing through me. For those few seconds, nothing else mattered. But then, like a cold splash of water, the reality of what I was doing hit me. My heart raced, not just from the kiss, but from the guilt that surged through me. David. I thought of him, sitting at home, probably waiting for me to return. The man who provided me with stability and love. What was I doing? I pulled back, my breath coming in quick gasps, my mind racing. "Jake, I started, but he silenced me with a finger pressed gently against my lips. "Shh. Just let it happen," he whispered, his eyes dark with desire. "I don't want to think about anything else right now." His words sent a thrill through me, and I felt myself wanting to give in, to forget everything and just be. But I was still tethered to my life, to the choices I had made. I took a step back, needing to regain my composure. "I can't," I said breathlessly, my heart torn between desire and duty. "This isn't right." Jake sighed, frustration flickering across his face. But there was a softness in his eyes, too. "I get it, but I can't pretend I don't want you. There's something between us, and you can't deny it." He was right. I couldn't deny the pull I felt towards him, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. But at what cost? I felt a heaviness in my chest, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "Let's just take a breath," I suggested, my voice shaky. "I need to think." He nodded, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Okay, but don't forget this moment." "I won't forget it." The unspoken promise hung in the air, and I knew that this kiss was just the beginning. A part of me wanted to run, to escape back to the safety of my life with David. But as I looked into Jake's eyes, I felt a longing deep inside that I couldn't ignore. I knew this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. The thrill of that kiss, the excitement of the unknown, had awakened something in me that I couldn't simply put back to sleep. I remember the first time I felt the thrill of Jake's words lighting up my phone screen. It was late at night, and I should have been settling down for sleep next to David. Instead, I found myself curled up on the couch, heart racing as I read his message. "Can't stop thinking about that kiss," he wrote, and I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. It was a simple message, yet it changed everything for me. I glanced at David, who was in the bedroom, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I could hear him softly snoring, his peacefulness contrasting sharply with the whirlwind of emotions I was experiencing. I typed a response, my fingers trembling slightly. "Me too." It felt so right. Just sending those words made my pulse quicken. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, but the thrill of it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. As the days turned into nights, our exchanges became more daring. It started with innocent flirts, but soon escalated to heated conversations that left my heart racing. "What would you do if I was there right now?" Jake asked one night. My breath caught in my throat. "I'd kiss you again," I replied, my heart pounding at the thought. The thrill of our secret felt intoxicating, and I couldn't get enough. Every time I received a message from him, I felt a rush of excitement mixed with guilt. I smiled to myself, even while sitting across from David at dinner. "Everything okay?" David would ask, his brow furrowing in concern. "Yeah, just a long day," I'd reply, forcing a smile. The truth was, my mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of Jake and what we were becoming. Then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. Jake suggested we meet, just the two of us, far from Seattle. My heart raced at the thought. "Let's get a hotel," he texted. "Just you and me. No distractions." I could hardly breathe at the prospect. I knew I was risking everything, my marriage, my stability, but the thought of being with him, of being wanted so intensely, was too enticing to resist. I hesitated for a moment, my heart battling with my mind. Could I really go through with it? But the thrill of the unknown, the anticipation of what could happen, pulled me in like a powerful tide. "Okay," I typed, my fingers shaking. "I'll meet you." I hit send, and it felt like I had just jumped off a cliff, free-falling into the depths of a desire I had never truly acknowledged before. The days leading up to our meeting were a blur. I spent them pretending everything was normal with David, laughing at his jokes and sharing in our daily routines. But inside, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I couldn't wait to feel Jake's arms around me again, to lose myself in the thrill of our secret. When the day finally arrived, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I drove to the hotel, I could hardly think straight. What was I doing? I could picture David, safe at home, completely unaware of what I was about to do. But the thought of being with Jake made the guilt fade into the background, replaced by an overwhelming sense of freedom. As I stepped into the hotel room, the air was thick with anticipation. My heart raced as I looked around, the dim lights creating an intimate atmosphere. And then there was Jake, leaning against the wall, his eyes dark with desire. The moment our eyes met, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. "Hey," he said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "I've been waiting for you." I felt a bolt of electricity shoot through me at his words. "I can't believe I'm actually here," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The tension between us was palpable, and I felt myself getting lost in the moment. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "We don't have to think about anything else," he murmured, and before I knew it, he was pulling me into his arms. The world outside ceased to exist as his lips met mine, igniting a fire within me that I had long buried. It felt reckless, exhilarating, and utterly forbidden. In that moment, all my worries disappeared. I was no longer a wife, bound by duties and expectations. I was simply a woman consumed by desire, lost in the heat of Jake's kiss. I felt alive, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I didn't want to hold back. As we pulled away, breathless and flushed, I knew I was crossing a line that I could never uncross. But as I looked into Jake's eyes, I realized that I didn't care. The thrill of this secret life was intoxicating, and I was ready to embrace it fully. This is just the beginning, I thought, excitement coursing through me as I realized how much I craved this new reality. "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that." I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, my heart torn between two very different worlds. I loved David, my husband. He was my rock, my safe space, the man who had always been there for me. Seattle was our home, a city that had cradled our dreams and hopes. Yet, despite the love that enveloped me, there was a growing emptiness inside me, a gnawing feeling that something vital was missing from my life. The truth is, I had started to feel as if I was living in a bubble, one that was beautiful on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. I would wake up each morning, go through the motions of breakfast with David, and then head off to work, my heart heavy with an unshakable sense of boredom. I would sit in meetings, listening to the same discussions, day in and day out. David would often talk about his day, his excitement palpable, while I struggled to muster up the same enthusiasm. I wanted to feel alive again. Then came that unexpected encounter with Jake at the cafe. I remember the moment vividly. I had just grabbed my usual caramel macchiato when I turned to leave and bumped straight into him. "Whoa, easy there," Jake chuckled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I couldn't help but laugh, brushing off the encounter. But there was an undeniable spark between us, a tension that lingered as we exchanged pleasantries. As the days turned into weeks, our interactions grew more charged. I would catch his eye during meetings, and a rush of excitement would course through me. It was as if we were sharing a secret that no one else could see. The first time we spoke about something personal, I felt a thrill. "You know, I never expected to meet someone like you here," Jake said, leaning closer. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and for the first time in ages, I felt alive. When he invited me for drinks after work, I almost said no. "Just one drink, it'll be fun," he insisted, flashing that charming smile. I hesitated, thinking of David, but I couldn't resist the temptation. After all, it was just a drink, right? As we sat together, the laughter flowed easily between us. I found myself sharing things I hadn't shared with anyone in years. "You know, I've been feeling a bit lost lately," I confessed, my heart racing as I spoke those words. Jake's gaze was intense, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. The connection deepened, and before I knew it, I was caught up in a whirlwind of emotions that I hadn't anticipated. It was intoxicating, the way he made me feel. I would return home to David, and while he was sweet and caring, I felt a growing frustration. He was so distant, so wrapped up in his own world, while Jake was right there, making me feel desired and alive. Then came the kiss, an unexpected moment that changed everything. It happened one night at the bar after a few drinks. Jake had pulled me into a corner, his eyes dark with desire. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, and suddenly his lips were on mine. I was shocked at first, but as I melted into the kiss, I felt a wave of excitement wash over me. I could hear David's voice faintly in the back of my mind, but it faded as I surrendered to the moment. After that, everything spiraled. Our late-night text exchanges became increasingly daring, each message igniting a fire within me. I would sit next to David, my heart racing as I read Jake's words, feeling a mix of exhilaration and guilt. "What's wrong, babe?" David would ask, his brow furrowed in concern. But I would just shake my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing, just work stuff," I would reply, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. When I made the decision to meet Jake in a hotel, it felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. I could hardly breathe as I entered the room, my heart pounding with both anxiety and thrill. The moment I stepped inside, I was free. The weight of my life melted away, and I was just me. No titles, no responsibilities. I could feel Jake's eyes on me, and suddenly, I was lost in the heat of our passion. But with that freedom came a creeping dread. I was betraying David in a way I never thought I could. Each moment spent with Jake was a moment I wasn't spending with my husband. Yet, the way Jake made me feel was intoxicating. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, the thrill of the forbidden coursing through my veins. As the days went by, the struggle between my two lives grew more intense. I found myself caught in a web of lies, justifying my choices to myself in ways I never thought I would. "It's just a bit of fun," I would tell myself, even as I felt the guilt gnawing at me. Jake made me feel wanted, desired, and alive. In contrast, at home, David felt like a distant memory, our conversations growing more strained. I remember the night I came back from another encounter with Jake. David looked at me with suspicion, his eyes searching mine. "You've been different lately," he remarked, his tone serious. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Just busy with work," I replied, my voice steady even as my heart raced. I could feel the lies piling up, each one heavier than the last. Then Jake proposed another weekend together, this time in his city. The thought sent a thrill through me, but it also filled me with dread. What did it mean for me? I found myself torn, caught between the excitement of the adventure and the weight of my reality. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked, his voice low and enticing. I hesitated, feeling the pull of both worlds, unsure of what my choice would mean. But the idea of continuing this adventure felt far more seductive than facing the truth at home. As I planned the next encounter with Jake, a wave of anxiety washed over me. David remained blissfully unaware, going about his routine as if nothing was amiss. The thought of letting go of Jake seemed impossible. My heart raced at the thought of saying goodbye to the one who had awakened something within me. The moment of decision approached, and I felt my resolve crumbling. "I'll go," I whispered to myself, knowing I was about to cross a line I might never return from. I'm not sure how I found myself here, hiding away in a hotel room with Jake, my heart racing and my mind buzzing. The weekend had been a whirlwind of excitement and nerves, a carefully crafted plan to escape the monotony of my life with David. It felt like a dream and a nightmare all at once. I remember the thrill of anticipation as I drove away from Seattle, leaving behind the stable life I had built, the life that was supposed to be enough. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice low and teasing as he leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Even as I said it, a part of me questioned my decision. I was a married woman, and this was all so wrong. But the thrill of secrecy electrified me. The thought of being with Jake, of giving in to this wild side of myself, was intoxicating. As we entered the room, the air was thick with tension. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, it felt like the outside world faded away, leaving just the two of us, cocooned in our own private bubble. I could hardly believe this was happening. I was about to spend a weekend with a man who made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. "Just us," Jake said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "No one to interrupt, just the way I like it." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. "What if someone finds out?" I asked, though a part of me didn't really care. "Let them," he shrugged, stepping closer. "This is our time." With that, he reached for me, pulling me into his arms. The kiss that followed was electric, igniting a fire within me that I had thought was long extinguished. I melted against him, my worries slipping away as I surrendered to the moment. It was like stepping into a new world, one where I could be whoever I wanted, far removed from the responsibilities and expectations that weighed me down. We spent the weekend lost in each other, every touch and whisper intensifying the connection we shared. In Jake's arms, I felt desired, cherished in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Each moment was a delicious escape from reality, the thrill of our secret adding to the passion between us. "Do you know how long I've wanted this?" he murmured one night, his fingers trailing along my arm, sending shivers through my body. "You drive me crazy. You know that?" I laughed softly, feeling a rush of warmth at his words. I didn't think I could do this. I didn't know I could want someone like this. Yet here we are, he said, a playful grin spreading across his face. Just you and me. It was liberating, living in that bubble of passion and freedom. But in the back of my mind, David's face lingered, casting a shadow over my newfound joy. I loved David, or at least I thought I did. He was my rock, my stability. But the more time I spent with Jake, the more I questioned everything I had ever known about love and desire. The weekend passed in a blur of laughter and stolen kisses, but with each fleeting moment of bliss, my heart grew heavier. The thrill of being with Jake was intoxicating, but the guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the life I was betraying. "Can we do this again?" Jake asked, his fingers entwined with mine as we lay in bed on our last morning together. "I don't know," I replied, the weight of my uncertainty heavy in the silence. What about David?" "Forget about him for now," Jake said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Just think about us." I wanted to. I wanted to drown out the voice of reason, the nagging guilt that threatened to ruin everything we had just created. "It's just so complicated," I finally admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Life is complicated," Jake said with a shrug. "But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy the moments we have." He was right, in a way, but as I lay there, caught between two worlds, I couldn't help but wonder how long I could keep this up. How long until the lies I was telling caught up with me. As we checked out of the hotel, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. The weekend had been everything I had hoped for, yet it left me with an ache in my chest. I was drawn to Jake, but the reality of my life with David loomed large and unyielding. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, concern flickering in his eyes as we stepped into the bright sunlight. "Yeah, just processing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Let's not think about that right now," he said, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Let's just enjoy the ride." I nodded, but inside, a storm raged. I craved the passion Jake brought into my life, yet I couldn't shake the guilt that clung to me. I was living a double life, and with each passing moment, I wondered how much longer I could balance the two. The thrill of my secret was intoxicating, but the fear of losing everything was always just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. I walked through the front door, the familiar scent of home wrapping around me like a warm blanket. But today, that blanket felt heavy, suffocating. David was in the living room, his face buried in a book, completely oblivious to my presence. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the tension that clung to me. "Hey, love," I said, my voice lacking the usual enthusiasm. He looked up, his eyes lighting up for a brief moment. "Hey, how was your day?" "Busy, you know how it is," I replied, trying to sound casual as I moved towards the kitchen. I busied myself with pouring a glass of water, the coolness of the glass contrasting with the heat rising in my cheeks. David resumed his reading, and I felt the weight of my secrets pressing down on me. Each day felt like a performance, and I was growing tired of pretending. The lies were becoming harder to maintain. I thought back to the last time I met Jake, the thrill of our stolen moments flooding my mind. I had never intended for it to go this far. It started with innocent flirtation, a shared laugh during a tense meeting, and suddenly I was caught in a web of desire that I couldn't escape. Jake made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Are you okay?" David's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to him, forcing a nod. "Yeah, just a little tired." "Want to watch something later?" "Sure, that sounds nice." I didn't really want to. What I wanted was to be wrapped in Jake's arms, to forget the life I had built with David. As I headed upstairs, I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with messages from Jake. My heart raced as I read his words, each one igniting a spark of excitement and guilt. "Can't stop thinking about you," he had texted. I could almost hear his deep voice whispering it in my ear, sending a thrill down my spine. I quickly typed back, "Me too. I can't wait to see you again." The rush of adrenaline was intoxicating, drowning out the nagging voice in the back of my mind, reminding me of my commitment to David. I felt powerful, desired, and the guilt. It faded away, if only for a moment. Dinner with David was another performance. I smiled and laughed at his jokes, but inside, I felt like a stranger in my own life. He spoke about his day, excited about a project at work, and I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. "Are you even listening?" David asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Of course I am," I replied, forcing myself to focus. "Right," he said, eyeing me suspiciously. "You've been a bit off lately. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just work stress," I lied. "I promise I'm fine." The doubt in his eyes was evident, but I quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation back to safer waters. I didn't want him to see the cracks forming in our seemingly perfect life. After dinner, I retreated to the bedroom, my phone buzzing again. "Let's meet this weekend," Jake's message read. My heart raced as I contemplated the idea. I could feel the pull of his words, the thrill of escaping the mundane. I typed back, "Yes, where?" The exchange of messages felt like a secret dance, each word bringing us closer. I imagined the way his lips would feel against mine, the warmth of his body pressed against me. It was intoxicating, and I craved it more than ever. As I lay in bed that night, I could hear David's soft breathing beside me. He looked so peaceful, so trusting. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the excitement of my secret life. I was living for those fleeting moments with Jake, and the thought of losing, that made my heart ache. The days dragged on, each one filled with more lies and excuses. David began to notice my distraction, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I had to be careful. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked one evening, his brow furrowed with concern. "Really, I'm fine," I insisted, forcing a smile. But inside, I was a storm of emotions, torn between the safe life I had built and the thrill that Jake brought into my world. Every time I returned home, I felt the weight of David's gaze upon me, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. The tension was palpable, even in our small interactions. I could feel him searching for answers in my eyes, and it terrified me. I had created a dual existence, one where I was a loving wife, and another where I was a woman consumed by desire. And with every lie I told, the walls were closing in around me. Yet, in those moments with Jake, when he would whisper sweet nothings in my ear, I could forget everything. He made me feel seen, wanted, and most importantly, alive. The lies began to stack up like bricks, each one forming a wall that separated me from the life I once knew. I had built a facade so strong that I almost believed it myself. But deep down, I knew that one day, the truth would come crashing down. "Are you happy?" I asked myself one night, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced back to the moments I had shared with Jake, the laughter and the passion, and for the first time, I hesitated. I didn't have an answer. I stood by the kitchen counter, absent-mindedly stirring my coffee, when my phone buzzed with a message from Jake. My heart raced as I read his words. "How about another weekend together, this time in my city?" For a moment, I felt the weight of my responsibilities slip away, and I was lost in the thrill of the proposal. But then, reality crashed down on me like a cold wave. What did this mean? Could I really do it again? I glanced over at David, who was sitting at the dining table, engrossed in his laptop. He looked so oblivious, so content. The sight tugged at my conscience. It was hard to reconcile the man I had built a life with and the excitement that coursed through me at the thought of being with Jake. David often brought me flowers, and he had a way of making me feel safe, but safety felt stifling lately. I wanted more, something wild and untamed. Just then, my phone buzzed again. "I can't stop thinking about you. Let's make this happen." Jake's words ignited a fire within me that I had long thought extinguished. I bit my lip, torn between the urge to abandon everything and the reality of my life with David. I took a deep breath and set my coffee down. "David, do you mind if I go out with some friends this weekend?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He glanced up, his brow furrowing slightly. "Sure, but are you okay? You've been going out a lot lately." "Yeah, just needed some time away," I replied, my heart racing as I texted Jake back. "I'm in." "Great," Jake replied instantly. "I'll pick you up Friday evening. You won't regret it." I slipped my phone into my pocket, feeling a mix of exhilaration and guilt. I knew I was heading into dangerous territory. The idea of a weekend away with Jake felt intoxicating, but the thought of leaving David behind gnawed at me. As the week dragged on, I became more anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was balancing on a precipice. My heart pounded every time I thought about being with Jake again. Yet the image of David waiting for me at home haunted me. On Thursday night, as David and I settled on the couch to watch a movie, I felt the tension between us. He wrapped his arm around me, but I was miles away. My mind was elsewhere, planning every detail of my upcoming escape. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing my distraction. "Yeah, just tired," I said, forcing a smile. He kissed my forehead, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He always had a way of making me feel loved, but at that moment, I felt trapped. The next day, I found myself packing a small bag, each item I folded feeling like a betrayal. I hesitated when I came to my favorite dress. Should I bring it? It felt wrong to wear something I had planned to wear for Jake, but the urge to impress him was too strong. Friday arrived, and as I got ready, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I glanced in the mirror, adjusting my hair, trying to look perfect for Jake. I wondered if he would notice the small details, the way my heart raced when he entered the room, or how I felt alive in his presence. When Jake pulled up in front of my apartment, I felt a rush of adrenaline. He leaned against his car, his smile wide as I approached. "You look amazing," he said, his eyes sparkling with desire. "Thanks, you don't look too bad yourself," I replied, my heart fluttering. The drive to his city was filled with flirtatious banter, and with every word exchanged, the tension between us grew. I could barely focus on the road as I imagined what awaited us. Arriving at his apartment, Jake opened the door and I stepped inside, my heart pounding in anticipation. The place was dimly lit, creating an intimate atmosphere. As he closed the door behind us, I could feel the electricity in the air. "Let's make this a weekend to remember," he said, stepping closer, his gaze intense. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I was crossing a line, but the thrill of it all was intoxicating. I felt adventurous and reckless, and it was exhilarating. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice low. "Maybe a little," I admitted, smiling, despite the guilt gnawing at me. "I promise you'll have a great time," he replied, his hand brushing against mine, sending shivers up my spine. In that moment, standing there with Jake, I felt like I was finally reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. The thought of David faded into the background, and all that mattered was the promise of passion and excitement that lay ahead. But as I looked around, the reality of my choices loomed over me. I knew I was about to dive headfirst into a world that could shatter everything I had built with David. Yet, the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. I stepped closer to Jake, feeling the pull between us grow stronger. What are we waiting for? I whispered, ready to embrace the adventure that lay ahead, even as the shadows of my choices lingered in the back of my mind. I sat at my kitchen table, the light from the window casting a warm glow over the room, but it felt cold to me. David was in the living room, engrossed in his evening routine. The sound of the television hummed in the background, a constant reminder of our mundane existence. I looked at my phone, my heart racing at the thought of Jake. The idea of seeing him again filled me with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Are you okay?" David's voice pulled me from my thoughts, and I forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about work," I replied, keeping my tone light. He nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I loved David. I really did. He was kind, stable, and always there for me. But lately, I felt suffocated by the monotony of our life together. It was as if I was living in a bubble, and I longed for something, anything, that could shake me awake. My phone buzzed on the table, and I quickly grabbed it, trying to hide my eagerness. It was a message from Jake. "Can't stop thinking about our last night together. Ready for round 2? A shiver ran down my spine as I read his words. I could almost hear his voice in my head, teasing and playful. "What's that?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just a work thing," I lied, quickly typing a response to Jake. "I can't wait. Let's plan something." My heart raced as I hit send. The thrill of the secret was intoxicating, but it also felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. After a few moments, my phone buzzed again. "Jake, how about this weekend? I know a great place." I read the message and felt a surge of desire. The thought of escaping with him, of leaving my life behind for just a few days, was almost too tempting to resist. "Are you sure you're okay?" David asked again, concern etched on his face. "Really, I'm fine," I insisted, forcing a laugh. "Just a little tired, that's all." As I watched David, a wave of guilt washed over me. He deserved better than this. He deserved my full attention, my honesty. But the thought of losing Jake felt like a punch to my gut. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a double life. Each time I met up with Jake, I had to weave a web of lies to cover my tracks. I'd tell David I was working late or meeting a friend, and each time I walked through the door, I felt the weight of my deceit lingering in the air, thick and suffocating. As the days passed, the anticipation of seeing Jake grew stronger. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing the danger yet unable to resist the heat. The thrill of our text exchanges, the stolen moments, and the way he looked at me with such intensity made my heart race. I craved that connection, that spark that had been missing from my life with David. "Let's go out this weekend," David suggested one evening. "We could try that new restaurant downtown." I forced a smile, nodding along, but inside, I was panicking. "That sounds great, but I might have plans," I said, the words feeling like poison on my tongue. "Plans? What kind of plans?" I might meet up with some colleagues," I replied, my stomach twisting. David's expression shifted slightly, but he nodded. "Okay, just let me know if you change your mind." I watched him walk away, feeling the weight of my decision settle heavily on my shoulders. I had to choose between my old life and this exhilarating new path with Jake. The moment I confirmed our weekend together, a part of me felt liberated. I was taking control of my life in a way I hadn't before, but another part of me cringed at the thought of facing David. How could I justify this? How could I betray the man who had always been there for me? That Friday, as I prepared for my weekend with Jake, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I was about to step into a world where I could be free, but at what cost? I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I wanted to feel beautiful, to feel desired, and Jake made me feel that way. As I finished getting ready, My phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jake. "Can't wait to see you. I've been counting down the days." I typed back quickly, my fingers trembling with anticipation. "Me too. I'll be there soon." As I stepped out the door, I caught a glimpse of David in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He looked up, smiling as I left. "Have a great time," he called out. "Thanks, I will," I replied, forcing the words out, even as my heart sank. Driving to the hotel, my mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. I knew I was about to cross a line that I could never uncross, but the thrill of the unknown, the promise of pleasure, and the chance to truly feel alive overpowered my guilt. As I parked and walked towards the entrance, my heart pounded in my chest. I was ready to embrace this new chapter, to dive headfirst into the passion I had been craving for so long. I took a deep breath, and with one last thought of David, I stepped inside, ready to leave my old life behind for just a moment.